The views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect those of this station.
Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those in the community, as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of Insights. I'm joined by ACC Professor of Political Science, Tim Kuhnlein. Tim, thanks for being here.
Good morning, Aaron.
And just over a week since the inauguration, so it's official, President Trump took his oath in office. So I wanted to speak a little bit about the inauguration ceremony and kind of what that means, the symbolism of it all.
Sure. Well, I think it was a very stark and heavy day, an important one. I mean, anytime we do something like this, we have a transition of power. To me, that pomp and circumstance, the ceremony, is really important to symbolize a system and how it functions. And there were a number of things that happened throughout that day, if you were watching, that really, if you pick about the details, they're very symbolically significant, as well as the content of his speech. I thought his speech was quite dark and kind of depressing, almost it was so stark. But then again, it's a reflection of the way he sees the world and the audience that he's speaking to. And in that respect, maybe it was appropriate given the message that he wanted to relay. Whether it reflects who we are and where we are as a country is another story, and how we relate to him. I mean, he talked a lot about this carnage. And I think that he's onto something. It's perhaps a bit of a strong word, but you know, when you look at various parts of our country, and you know, there are places that feel like they're at second world levels of development. And it is disturbing to see this, the wealthiest nation on the face of the earth. I think, you know, critics might say, well, then how did we get to that point in the first place? And certainly Mr. Trump pointed fingers at a certain class of people, a political class, when in fact it's probably more than that. So, you know, his reference to tombstones, the factories, I mean, I think we could all relate to that, especially coming from Michigan, and if you're anywhere remotely familiar with Detroit, you know what he was alluding to. Speaking to the middle class, that we've redistributed the wealth to the rest of the world. Many Americans, particularly American workers, being left behind, and they're being ignored. I think there's a sense of a lot of truth to this. You know, then there's the issue of, you know, what do we do about this?
And I think one of the things he speaks about that kind of appeals to both sides is the idea of that there's a failing infrastructure in America. And that's kind of what he was talking about within his speech as well. And I know in Michigan, that's Governor Rick Snyder, that was his State of the State address, was all about the failing infrastructure in Michigan and how to fix that. So do you think, when he's speaking about that, do you think it's truly dark and depressing when he's giving that talk, or is that a way to kind of get people involved?
Well, I think it's probably both. He's exaggerating things, like so many things, to get people's attention. But it is, in many respects, a reflection of where we are in some places. And that, I think, speaks to the bifurcation of our society, the underclass, the post-industrial versus the new economy of technology and skill and education. And he's speaking to that other audience in many respects, although we all have to be paying attention to this, because that bifurcation or that division in our society can be very destabilizing. It is destabilizing. You can see it in the tumult that we see in our cities and our, you know, societal trends. But it also speaks to our politics. And I thought it was really telling how Senator Schumer, in the prelude to Mr. Trump's speech, used the metaphor of the Civil War in a letter from the Civil War era. Because in so many respects, it does feel like we're still struggling with the legacies of our Civil War. They're different, obviously. We're 150 years removed from that. But when you think about the racial issues, the socioeconomic undercurrents of all of that, and not just for blacks, but now for post-industrial labor, in a globalized, post-industrial international economy, a globalization economy, These are going to be some very challenging sort of tensions to sort of temper and correct. And we'll obviously see it play itself out in our politics. You know, the other thing that I thought was pretty interesting symbolically is that Trump spoke, you know, it's almost, he used language like, I am issuing a decree to be heard throughout the land. It almost sounded like Roman imperial rhetoric. And again, it's symbolism for him. He's definitely about the show and the effect. But it's also kind of disturbing in some respects when you think about the tensions and the concern that we have for concentrating power in an executive branch, something our founders were terribly concerned with. You know, we could fold in the populist sentiments here, although we'll be talking about that a little bit more. This notion of a decree, I thought it was really telling when, if you followed the coverage later, Trump was at the Capitol building and his own inaugural organizers reminded him, referencing a crystal vase that, or bowl that they were giving to him as a gift in honor of the ceremony, that the compass on the bottom of the bowl had the Capitol building, not the White House, as the center of gravity for our republic. And everybody kind of chuckled and laughed, but it was a subtle reminder by Trump's own organizers that he's part of a larger equation and not the center of gravity in this republic of ours. And I think that's, again, symbolically, that we remind one another of this and that we witness these reminders of how our system functions is really important.
And we were just talking about the division within America that still exists. And I want to move back a little bit in the inauguration itself. And a lot of the talk was about the peaceful transition of power. Yeah. So I want to know exactly what does that mean and how important is that?
Well, it's extremely important in a society that, you know, has been prosperous partly because we don't end up in civil wars or revolutions and all these skirmishes that play themselves out in violence. Now, we are seeing violence in some respects, but it's not the magnitude that you see, for example, in the Latin American republics, where governments go so far from one extreme to the other, and then you see backlashes from, and then eventually certain powers that be will rely on military forces to essentially take control and rule by military rule as opposed to civil rule or civil governance. So, you know, despite our dramatic, what appear to be dramatic and highly escalated tensions over where we should go as a country, our ability to transition from one administration to the next, one party to the other party, and time again, not only within the executive branch, but recognizing these differences between branches and then within Congress itself is really important. You know, again, the symbolism of Hillary Clinton being present in that luncheon, she didn't have to be there. George W. wasn't there. They were all at the inauguration, but the luncheon in the Capitol building afterwards, the tone, the discussion, Trump recognizing Clinton and asking people to stand and give her an ovation, I think is really important. I wish it were broadcast more fully.
I thought it was very refreshing myself, just as a viewer, because you hear about the animosity between both sides so much. When you actually see them in person kind of acting like people together, it's really refreshing to see.
And it's not to sugarcoat the fact that there are serious differences. We have a tug of war, whether it's a civil war, what's the end goal here? And I think in that sense, these ceremonies, these rituals, these expectations that people will behave and be responsible with what they say and do is very important. I think that's why there's so much reaction to Trump, that he's testing these waters. And he's testing these waters in a system that has traditionally been, well, should be very cautious of executive authority.
Definitely. Well, this is fascinating stuff, Tim. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to take a quick break, but join us after for more insights.